Hey everyone, and welcome back to the WTF Fake It Till You Make It show. So we're on episode 9, and I thought it's the perfect episode to talk about fairy tales, and not the Disney versions. So most of us will have grown up on a steady diet of fairy tales, the once upon a times and the inevitable happily ever afters. We actually even use the words fairy tale as an adjective now. A fairy tale wedding, a fairy tale romance, a fairy tale ending. We equate the term with maple syrup perfection. And of course, if you ask me, we also equate fairy tales with this nonsense idea of the damsel in distress and Prince Charming coming to her rescue. Yikes. Anyway, before I go off on a rant, the versions of fairy tales we usually talk about are the Disney versions, right? So depending on your age, the very first 2D cartoon versions of, say, Snow White with the shrill voice, or the slightly newer animation style depictions, or even the more recent live action variety, for example, the new Cinderella. So these became the generally accepted versions over the last, 50 years because of cutting edge technology. I mean, even that Snow White flat cartoon was cutting edge in its time, right? And excellent mass marketing and the insistence of one man, Walt Disney, that the purpose of a storyteller, I quote, is to instill hope again and again and again. And that's really nice, right? But in general, this also aligned with a shift in society at large. So the concept of childhood, which is fairly recent, became more and more concrete. Before, you'd start working the farms or learning the trade of your parents basically as soon as you were physically or mentally able. So that's why it was kind of so economical to have a brood of children, whereas now you really have to consider even the expense of having one. Over time we started believing in education for all, awesome, and that child labor was perhaps not so desirable. We also started shielding children from some darker, tougher concepts like sickness or arbitrary cruelty or death, right? Because they really shouldn't be dealing with that stuff early on, ideally. So for children, in the words of Walt Disney, we create happiness. We stick to the Disney version of life for as long as we can. But in actuality, fairy tales have been present throughout history, across cultures and geographies, giving rise to many variations of certain archetypes. And there are definite archetypes, right? Patterns. In fact, there's a whole system of classifying fairy tales called the Arne-Thompson-Uther system. For example, the general Cinderella narrative can be filed neatly under the label, get this, okay? Tale type 510A, persecuted heroine. So, yeah, if you're ever looking for Cinderella, you know right where to find her. These stories actually share a shocking number of elements. And I say shocking because they're from all over the world, remember? So either these stories all came from the same place before humans dispersed across the world, or the patterns are an indication of the way humans think, feel, or experience life. I mean, either way, it's really cool. I can't personally decide which theory I lean towards, but I'm curious about you. Anyway, a lot of these fairy tales, which have indeed been shared with children across time, are really very dark. They're haunting and ruthless and often come with some kind of moral or warning, which doesn't always make sense to me. Much like the epic poems we talked about last episode, actually, a lot of these stories will have been handed down orally across communities and, beyond via travel and through generations, right? So time and space. These stories were mostly only recently written down by fairy tale collectors like, the Brothers Grimm or Hans Christian Andersen or Straparola. Many details will have been tweaked and personalized, per culture, per time, per person. But again, many of the main plot points remain remarkably intact. So, don't take my word for it. Let's have an actual look at some of the most well-known fairy tales. We all know the story of Sleeping Beauty. So let's start with the Disney version. The baby Princess Aurora is cursed by a wicked witch, Maleficent, who has her own movie now, wow. But she is cursed to prick her finger on a spindle before she turns 16 and to die. Of course, we're talking Disney, so another fairy manages to swoop in and tweak the curse so that Aurora instead falls into a deep sleep and will be awoken by true love's kiss, which she is when her Prince Charming comes along to save her. The usual la-di-da, Prince marries princess, happily ever after, right? Actually, one of the original versions of Sleeping Beauty, recorded by famous Italian fairy tale collector Giambattista Basile in the early 1600s is a fair bit more disturbing. This version is called Sun, Moon, and Talia. So Talia is the daughter of a great lord, so not quite a princess, but still up there. And astrologers who come to visit upon her birth predict that she will unfortunately prick her finger on a flax splinter, and her life will be in danger. Similar to the Disney version, all flax is banned from the kingdom, but of course, Talia does end up inevitably pricking her finger and falling into a dead faint. The Lord is so heartbroken that instead of burning her, right, or burying her, he basically stores her. I mean, okay, that's a bit rude, but yes, he just puts her away in one of his estates in the country. Now, a traveling king kind of breaks in and enters this estate while he's hunting and happens upon Talia. This is where it gets really bad. Overcome by love or something, despite the fact that he cannot wake her, he sleeps with her and then leaves. Now, in her sleep, she gets pregnant, and 9 months later, still in her sleep, bears twins. The twins cannot quite figure out how to feed themselves and end up sucking on the finger with the splinter in it, removing it and therefore waking her. She sees her children, somehow recognizes that they are her children, and names them Sun and Moon. So they continue living together in that estate pretty happily. Now, the roving king comes back to visit. Yeah, don't ask me why. And the two fall in love. Again, don't ask me why. But, plot twist, the king is married. So when he returns to his kingdom, his poor wife actually catches him mumbling Talia, Sun, and Moon in his sleep. And she's furious, of course. So she secretly has the kids summoned to her court through forgery and trickery, where she asks the cook to cook the two children and feed them to the king. The cook, being a regular person, cooking children maybe is not so much the cook scene, thinks, yeah, nope, and cooks 2 lambs instead. The queen is obviously unaware of this little switcheroo. Next, she has Talia brought to court and tries to burn her at the stake, but is caught by the king before the roasting begins. His wife tells him with no little delight that he's eaten his own children, so he has his wife burnt at the stake instead. He's about to burn the cook too, but the cook comes clean, lets him know that the kids are alive and he in fact just ate lamb. The king is relieved, promotes the cook, and marries Talia, and they live happily ever after with their kids. Except the last line of the story isn't happily ever after. Instead, it's this weird proverb. Those whom fortune favors find good luck even in their sleep. Yeah, it's kind of shady given the context. Well, there you have it, folks. That's Sleeping Beauty for you. If anyone can make sense of that last proverb, do let me know. All right, let's move on to the next tale. So perhaps one of the most consistently violent tales is that of Snow White. No matter which variation, this one gets ugly. So let's start with the Disney version again. In a nutshell, a queen is enraged when her magic mirror informs her that her stepdaughter, Snow White, is the most beautiful woman in the land. She is resolved to kill her, thereby restoring her status as the most beautiful woman in the land, and even in the Disney version tries to kill her in several ways. Snow White finds herself eventually trapped in a forest where she comes upon the house of the 7 dwarves who take care of her. She's living a happy, rustic life, but of course that silly mirror lets the queen know she's still alive, and so the death attempts continue. When she takes a bite of a poisoned apple, eventually she falls into a dead faint. I know, this seems to happen often, huh? Well, the dwarves stick her in a crystal coffin where eventually a wandering prince sees her, falls in love with her, and wakes her up with a kiss. I know, again. They get married, they live happily ever after. But seriously though, this whole thing of men falling in love with sleeping women. Anyway, as dark as this version actually already is, I think one of the darkest variations is a Romanian one that was recorded in the mid-1800s. As in the story you're all familiar with, there's a woman with a magic mirror who tells her every day that she's the fairest in the land. However, as her daughter grows up, and yes, in this version it's her biological daughter, the mirror starts saying that in fact the daughter is the more beautiful. Incensed, the mother decides to maim the girl, okay? She bakes a salty cake and takes it along with some water and her daughter to the forest. The daughter is hungry and asks for some cake. The mother says she'll only give her some cake if she first gouges an eye out, which she does. So the daughter, now one-eyed, eats, but the salt in the cake makes her thirsty, so she asks for water. Again, the mother says she will only give her water if she gouges the other eye out. So the girl is completely blinded, and the mirror concedes that now the mother is again the most beautiful in the land. However, the daughter, being ultra naive and maybe a little too nice, rather than being upset about her blindness, simply thanks God for the fact that overall she is still safe and intact. The Virgin Mary hears her and tells her to wash her eyes in this fountain, after which her eyes are magically restored. Again, she becomes the fairest in the land. She falls asleep near the fountain and is found by 12 robbers. These robbers each want her for a wife, but, actually being decent people, decide to ask her if she'd like to marry any of them when she wakes up. If she doesn't, they'll happily adopt her as a sister and take care of her. So nice, right? So she picks that second option, of course. Now the mother, of course, knows she's still alive and tries to kill her in a variety of ways, the usual. And eventually, yes, she falls into a dead faint. Yeah, I know again, right? And the robbers, miserable, they put her on a platform in the middle of the forest. A prince comes along, falls in love with her, despite referring to her, I quote, as a precious statue, and decides to kiss her as she sleeps. Gross. Anyway, she wakes up, they get married and have a child, except the story doesn't end there. The mother, the evil mother, who has discovered where the daughter is pretending to be the midwife, and when the baby is born, she stabs and kills the child. She also then tries to kill her daughter, but the prince intervenes in time and kills the mother instead. The end. That's pretty grim, right? It's not just me. Anyway, I find the Christian elements in this version particularly fascinating, as you don't see religious references in fairy tales too often, so kind of cool. Anyway, yeah, I don't think that one is reclaiming its status as a bedtime story anytime soon. Yikes. Okay, I want to shift over to another classic, Cinderella. I find this one particularly cool because one of the oldest recorded versions of this is actually from China, and it was written by Duang Chengxi in the 9th century. That is well over 1,000 years ago. It's called Ye Xian. What's wild is how similar this version actually is to the Disney version, complete with the abuse of stepmother and stepsister, the help of a fairy godmother figure. In this version, it's actually the girl's mother's spirit, but in getting dressed and sneaking out for a festival. Okay, similar enough to a ball, right? Her slipper is left at the party. A royal, in this case a king, not a prince, but still, a royal eventually obtains the slipper, tries to find its owner, and eventually locates his mystery lady, and of course they end up happily married. Slightly darker, though, is the fact that the stepmother and stepsister, they don't get off easy, right? They're kind of stoned to death in the end of the Chinese version. A little extreme a punishment if you ask me, but okay. I mean, I wasn't the one who was in Cinderella's place, so not my judgment call. In fact, there's actually an even older version of Cinderella written as early as the year 7 BC. So yeah, that's right, over 2,000 years ago in Greece. So interestingly, in this case, Cinderella is a prostitute named Rhodopis. So yeah, Rhodopis is bathing when an eagle flies away with her shoe or sandal and deposits it with the king of Egypt. The king is so enchanted by this shoe, and I completely understand, right, what he must have felt, as I am often also completely enchanted by shoes. Anyway, he sets out to find the foot that fits it. He does, of course, and they marry, and she becomes queen of Egypt. I find nothing in this version upsetting, actually, which is so refreshing for a fairy tale. So yay, well done, Greece. Anyway, one of my favorite modern fairy tale renditions is by Roald Dahl, actually. He wrote a poem combining the Three Little Pigs and Little Red Riding Hood. It's disturbing, absolutely, but I think it's so witty. It's actually fairly short, only takes a few minutes. So rather than summarize it for you, I'm actually just going to read it to you so you can enjoy it fully. I hope you do. Okay, I'm going to start now. The animal I really dig above all others is the pig. Pigs are noble, pigs are clever, pigs are courteous, however. Now and then, to break this rule, one meets a pig who is a fool. What, for example, would you say if strolling through the woods one day, right there in front of you, you saw a pig who'd built his house of straw? The wolf who saw it licked his lips and said, "That pig has had his chips. Little pig, let me come in. No, no, by the hairs on my chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." The little pig began to pray, but Wolfie blew his house away. He shouted, "Bacon, pork, and ham! Oh, what a lucky wolf I am!" And though he ate the pig quite fast, he carefully kept the tail till last. Wolf wandered on a trifle bloated, surprise, surprise, for soon he noted another little house for pigs, and this one had been built of twigs. Little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hairs on my chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." The wolf said, "Okay, here we go." He then began to blow and blow. The little pig began to squeal. He cried, "Oh, wolf, you've had one meal. Why can't we talk and make a deal?" The wolf replied, "Not on your Nelly," and soon the pig was in his belly. "Two juicy little pigs," Wolf cried, "but still I'm not quite satisfied. I know how full my tummy's bulging, but oh, how I adore indulging." So creeping quietly as a mouse, the wolf approached another house, a house which also had inside a little piggy trying to hide. "You'll not get me," the piggy cried. "I'll blow you down," the wolf replied. "You'll need," pig said, "a lot of puff, and I don't think you've got enough." Wolf huffed and puffed and blew, the house stayed up as good as new. "If I can't blow it down," Wolf said, "I'll have to blow it up instead. I'll come back in the dead of the night and blow it up with dynamite." Pig cried, "You brute, I might have known." Then picking up the telephone, he dialed as quickly as he could the number of Red Riding Hood. "Hello," she said, "who's speaking, who?" "Oh, hello, Piggy, how'd you do?" Pig cried, "I need your help, Miss Hood. Oh, help me please, d'you think you could?" "I'll try, of course," Miss Hood replied. "What is on your mind?" "Oh, wolf," Pig cried. "I know you've dealt with wolves before, and now I've got one at my door." "My darling pig," she said, "my sweet, that's something really up my street. I've just begun to wash my hair, but when it's dry, I'll be right there." A short while later, through the wood came striding brave Miss Riding Hood. The wolf stood there, his eyes ablaze and yellowish like mayonnaise. His teeth were sharp, his gums were raw, and spit was dripping from his jaw. Once more the maiden's eyelid flickers. She draws the pistol from her knickers. Once more she hits the vital spot and kills him with a single shot. Pig, peeping through the window, stood and yelled, "Well done, Miss Riding Hood." "Ah, Piglet, you must never trust young ladies from the upper crust. For now Miss Riding Hood, one notes, not only has 2 wolfskin coats, but when she goes from place to place, she has a pigskin traveling case." Okay, you've got to admit, that's really excellent. Well, on that mildly horrifying but admitted awesome note, I'm going to leave you for this week, and I shall see you next week for episode 10. So enjoy your Wednesday and see you soon.